Let's ask Michael Wilson, our expert business commentator on this very subject. Michael, welcome to the show, my friend.
Good evening.
Was the British banking sector and the finance sector in general what David Cameron had in mind?
No, I think the most sensible thing he said was about 2 weeks ago, when he said that actually the recovery in this country is going to come from small businesses. And I think what he said was that if each small business in this country, of which there are 5 million, employs one other person, then the economy will start to grow. And his job, and the Chancellor's job in the budget, is to make sure there is a low-cost, no-cost solution to this, which is cutting red tape, making sure that small businesses can grow, that micro businesses can actually achieve things without all the rubbish that 10 years of the previous administration have actually piled on them. That's the way forward. The bankers in this, they make great headlines. They are relevant. What really is important in this country is the totem, is a small business around your corner employing local people. The bankers thing was a huge mistake, and of course they got into enormous amounts of trouble. And I'm sure, George, I don't need to go back through all the dull history of all that. Lloyds, let's start with that. £3.5 billion loss, because they have decided to set aside £3.2 billion to cover this disgraceful payments protection insurance mis-selling, which they need to do. These banks got too big. Royal Bank of Scotland have promised 2 years of pain. Taxpayer, we have 82% of it. That needs to be put right now. However and whatever you think about these people who are in charge of these companies, we need them to put those banks back into the economy as quickly as possible. It's not going to happen very quickly. The most important thing, I thought, if I may just go back to the Lloyds thing today, is that 2012 is going to be tough. They're going to have new banking regulations. There's the Eurozone crisis. It's going to take them 2 or 3 years to get back into a position whereby they're paying dividends, and that gets the taxpayer getting the money back from them. That is the most important thing. 2012 is going to be horrible. 2013 might be slightly better. The one thing that politicians would really like, or at least the coalition would really like, is if they can actually deliver these banks back into the mainstream, i.e. being privately owned and repaying the taxpayer for what you and I have given them by that time. I think it's 50-50, to be absolutely honest. Does that kind of get close to where you're going?
Well, I mean, how can the banks be irrelevant to this story if we've hear me out, Michael.
Yes, okay.
5 million small businesses. Yeah, if they all took on one new member of staff, imagine the impact. But the small businesses can't do it, not because of red tape, which has been the accretion of 10 years of the previous administration, of which I assure you I'm a more stringent critic even than you. They cannot do so because the banks will not lend them money, give them overdrafts in order to expand their businesses.
The banks would give them money. What you do not want banks to do is to lend to risky business. It doesn't matter when it is, whether it's now or 10 years ago. You don't throw money at things. What the banks are finding is, to defend your point slightly, is that the cost of lending people money has gone up so much because the banks have to raise money on the wholesale markets, and that is deeply expensive these days because of the way that the financial crisis has actually happened. Now, I don't know what happens in terms of banks. If you go to your bank manager and you're a small business, it is difficult to borrow money, but there are lots of other ways of doing that which are actually coming to the fore as we speak at the moment. There are lots of small organisations and small cluster organisations that are willing to go to small businesses and saying, this is how you borrow money. The reason I said that the bank thing is irrelevant is that's like the headlines. Underneath the headlines is an enormous amount of energy going on in this country, which is actually creating small businesses. Necessity is the mother of invention. The transistor was born. That's the greatest ever electronic invention apart from electricity. That was born in a recession. B-Sky B was born in a recession. Vodafone was born in a recession. What tends to happen is when push comes to shove, business starts to get inventive. Inventions actually happen.
Well, we'll see. I want to. We've not got.
It's the way it actually happens. I think.
I want to ask you an important question, Michael.
We don't never hear about these kind of things because they don't make the headlines. I can tell you, because I've been looking at this for about the past 6 months, that small businesses are doing very well indeed. There's a huge amount of stuff going on there.
Well, there's not a lot of sign of it. I want to ask you one last question, Michael, if you'll forgive me. The backlash now developing against the job experience scheme of the government, the big businesses that are now pulling out of it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Where does this go now?
I have never heard so much rubbish in my life about that. Now, what happens is, I'll tell you what, do you want a airy-fairy postgraduate who's flim-flamming around in media studies, or would you like somebody who has actually had to face a queue of angry customers in McDonald's every night in central London to gain work experience? I would prefer the latter. The thing about this slave labour stuff I don't buy that whatsoever. 50% of the people who've been taken on for no pay by this company have actually had positions in those sponsoring companies. I think it's a great idea. It's not slave labour.
How come nobody else seems to agree with you, including big business?
George, it is a foot in the door.
But big business is pulling out of it.
I don't know how you started your working life. I started my working life, doing a paper round, washing up and all the rest of it. I did get paid for it. No, absolutely. Experience is the key. And it's
okay. That was Michael Wilson. We couldn't get David Cameron to make his passionate defence of big business, so we got Michael Wilson, the business commentator, to passionately defend it for him, even though actually big business is pulling out of the slave labour scheme faster than you could say Jack Robinson. I'll be back.